Yeah, it's okay.
Hello.
It has been pronounced Villain at times. I'm like,
yeah, I thought it was that.
It's okay to be villain, but I'm a villain.
Yeah, in English we wouldn't say the E on the end. That's
At
why
the
it
end,
is.
yes,
Yeah, that's
yes.
why. But it's all right. It's a bit of a tongue twister. There we go. We'll try again. Okay. Okay. Hello and welcome again to Write Smart, the creative learning podcast, where we talk about experiential learning, about creativity and the benefits that that can have on children and young people in their education. I'm joined again this week by the fabulous and inspirational Sibusiso Villani, the first Black African to summit Everest. And not only has he done it once, he's done it twice, just to show us all how brilliant he is. And we are blessed to have him with us, and he's going to share some of his insights into his motto, which is living a life without limits, and how that can translate into education, and how we can help our young people strive for a life without limits and to achieve their full potential. But it's our job as educators, I believe, to guide them and give them the opportunities to do that. So welcome, Sibu. Lovely to have you again here. This week, we're going to talk about what is your passion. Let's kick the interview off with, what about you, Sibu? Did you have any passions growing up? How young were you when you thought maybe you were perhaps a bit different, or, in a good way, in a way that made you more ambitious, maybe?
Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed. A very good morning, and thank you for having me. Yes, it's a very relevant and very important topic that we are discussing, that we're talking about today, which is about passion. And passion is very important in every individual, young and old. We must. But did I have a passion of my own while growing up? It would take some time for me to identify with what my passion was. But the good thing I was doing is, because of my exposure, even though growing up in very rural South Africa and Swaziland, I was exposed to a lot of things that I ended up liking and loving to do, which is what passion is all about. And the first for me, which I want to blame my mother on it at some stage, was at a very young age, I realized that I had the ability to run and run fast, and I had a football playing soccer skill. But my mother, who had never understood why do 22 men chase each other and wanting or threatening to break each other's bones. I don't know how my mother would have acted had she watched a game of rugby. I'm sure she would have just fainted, because she couldn't stand watching people play football. And as such, she said to me, "There's no football playing," because and then she made valid points though, because she said to me, if you get injured, I can't possibly afford to send you to a hospital for people to treat your leg or anything. And I don't even understand why people do that. So I realized I was passionate about it, because if I had the smallest of chances, I'll just sneak away and just go play, and that was that. And I loved it. And I realized that and I was a natural on football playing, because I was one of those rare breeds of people who could use both their feet efficiently, and I had pace. And so I really enjoyed it. So I thought at first that that was going to be my passion. I was going to play football and played to be a professional football player. But because of my mother's restriction, we grew up in a state where you just respected what your parents said or guided. You dare not go play, and you wouldn't go. It happened like that up until I left primary school and went to high school. And by that time, I was beyond being recruited, because I had started high school quite late. So I never played. I never got to play soccer professionally. No. And when I look on the positive side of things for the life I live now, I'm like, oh yeah, well, I'm better off without having been a professional soccer player, because I've done more better things than I would have done anyway. So that was my sort of early childhood passions, things that I loved doing. And the second, I realized I had an interest on and ended up enjoying, because passion is about enjoyment as well. And it was road running. So that started quite at school as well, because I realized that I had the ability to run and I preferred long distances. I think that's probably why even today I still run from half marathons up until ultra marathons. Well, talking of ultra marathons, this coming Sunday I'm running 90 kilometers.
Good grief.
Virtual. It's a virtual event. So it was just when I was still young that I realized I have the running ability, and therefore I enjoyed running. Track and fields, that's what I did, but preferring to run longer distances from 1500 to the 5,000. We never had the 10,000 during my schooling days, the 5,000, which is a new thing. I probably would have gone for that. So on the sporting side of things, that is what I wanted. I was sort of passionate about, and I did it with every drive and every dedication. When I got that moment to go and just play soccer, it was so competitive. That was me. I just wanted us to win every day. And even on the road running, but on road running, there's one thing I realized, was that road running is not about competing with other people, or maybe that's the way I am. I am competitive, but I won't compete with anyone. I just compete with myself, because I believe from a very young age up until today that you can only run at your best, or you can only perform at your best. If you give it your best, then if someone is performing less than you are, you will win. But so it's focusing on you. So I do that all the time, and I just commit, because passion for me. If you're passionate about something, you will make the time to do it. You will commit to whatever the hard work or the effort is. So on the sports side, there was that. But on the life side of passion, because when we're talking about the word passion, it encompasses a lot of who we are as human beings. And so it can be either your sporting side and your career side, or what are you passionate about? That's what we're talking about. So for me, being influenced by the people around you, because that pretty much determines how we live our life and what our passions become at the end. Our neighbors was the father was a vehicle mechanic and a motor mechanic, and he would always come back home driving these different cars, and his son, who was a few years older and at a couple of grades higher than I was, he started working and helping him as a motor mechanic during school holidays, when I was just helping my class teacher as well to sort of make a bit of pocket money. So at the back of my mind, I thought that I was going to be a motor mechanic, and I sort of tried to build the passion around that. And later, even then, it sort of went on up until high school, because when I needed to choose my subject combinations, ideally I needed to choose between metalwork and technical drawing, which is what I did. Big mistake. Thinking that, no, motor mechanic is my passion. No, it wasn't my passion. It was just a thought and some idea, a wild idea that maybe I would be, but it was just influenced by where I was. And then, first of all, I realized from scratch, from day one, I realized that I couldn't draw. I couldn't sketch. I can't even sketch a smiley, which my daughter does in like half a second. And I can't even do that. How dismal I was. And there was now I myself struggling for 5 years with technical drawing and getting the lowest marks, and metalwork as well. I couldn't draw and design. So it was just a wrong idea. So that is the thing about trying to identify your passion. You might lie to yourself saying, this is my passion, but if it's an idea, then it is not your passion. A passion is something that comes from inside, something that gives you the energy, something that you will just feel excited and every time it is mentioned to you. So yeah, those were my childhood one when I was growing up. So it does take, I must say this, I believe it takes a very, very long time for some of us to identify with what their passions are. And then other people are very lucky because they can identify with their passions when they are very small. So it's not a problem when you are young and still confused as to what is your passion, or if you have identified with that, then good for you. But for some people, it takes a long time.
Yeah. Do you know, there's a few things there that made me quite interested. The first is that I think in school this happens a lot because the curriculum can be quite narrow and it's very prescriptive. So like you're saying, yeah, because your friend was a motor mechanic, well, I'll be, maybe that's good for me then. And as teachers, sometimes we're saying, well, you've got to learn this and you've got to learn that. And these children sort of go through their education thinking, oh yeah, that's what I've got to learn. But like you say, it's not actually their passion. And really, again, I love the idea. You've got to compete with yourself. And this is when we talk a bit later in future podcasts, we'll talk about inclusion because that's massive for me. And sometimes when the curriculum is as narrow and as prescriptive as it can be, you're pitching, you know, A against B, aren't you? Now, I am not a runner. I've never been. I don't think I've run 90 kilometres in my life, let alone a race. No, I don't even run for a bus. I am not a runner. I hate it. I couldn't think of anything worse. I'm in complete admiration of you, but it ain't happening for me. Never, never. So me, to try and pitch myself against you, I'm always going to feel inadequate. I'm always going to feel like I'm not good enough. Was it Einstein who said something about if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's always going to feel like a failure because it's a swimmer. You know, it's something along those lines. So I think that's really important. I think it's really important that we encourage children to compete. In life, you do have to compete with other people. Of course you do, to a point. But I think actually your most important competitor is yourself, isn't it? Is your own brain, is your own mind. And I've always been a huge believer of saying to children, your best is always good enough. If you get to the end of something and you haven't done your best and you've not got the grades you wanted or you've not achieved what you wanted, if you haven't done your best, then you've only got yourself to blame. But if you've done your best, that is more than good enough. You can't do better than your best, and you should not be forced to pitch your best against someone else's best. Because we go back to the thing, you're best at running and my best at running. I think it took me 11 minutes to run a mile at school. I think you could walk it with one leg and your blindfold quicker than that. I mean, it's just shocking. But there's no point. There's no point to that. All that does is makes me feel terrible, and maybe from a child's point, it makes you think you're invincible, but there's bound to be someone else who maybe can run faster than you, maybe not. But do you know what I mean? It just gives that false, it's no good. It's no good for your self-esteem. So I really think I love that. You know, your biggest competitor is yourself, and your passions, they need to come from within. And so that leads me on. So you've sort of covered quite nicely, you know, you were quite young. I also think as well, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't go to school until you were 10. We've talked about that before, roughly, because you were very poor and you didn't have, you know, in the UK, we're dreadfully complacent about the fact that education is free, it's open to everybody. You just rock up and you moan about the fact that you've got to do homework, but we don't quite see it always as the privilege that it is. But I also think, you know, there's a lot of these Scandinavian countries where the children don't even start school until they're 7. And you obviously didn't start school until you were later in life because, you know, financial or situations, your circumstances. But that doesn't seem to me that it held you back. Well, it certainly didn't hold you back. And really, you can't say that between, I don't know, 4 or 5, when you might have started school in England, and 10, you can't tell me you didn't learn anything.
Oh no, I learned a lot. Absolutely. Well, that's very important that you bring that. No, I didn't feel I wasn't even left behind at all, except that by the time I started grade 1, and it so happened that some of the kids were repeating, so they could write and better because they'd spent already from preschool a little bit of writing, but there was only that. But it didn't mean that I'd lost a lot. I learned quite a lot actually, and in fact, to sort of add on to that, within the first term of my being at grade 1, I competed equally as the rest of them all who had gone through preschool up until they were there. And I remember very well that throughout from that time, achieved or got top marks than I did. I was always the better kid, and in fact, we were the way we were graded in according to marks. It was funny because it was those days where your teacher will mark your script and that whatever that exam was, if it was your maths or your spelling, and then on the day of the next day she will walk in class holding all your exercise or notebooks, and then she will all call you to come to the front, and you all stood there. And then she called one by one. So the top earning mark earning kid would be the first one to go sit down. And I always did that. And then eventually there would be the last 5 that would just remain standing. And we knew they're the ones that didn't possibly make it. I know it was humiliating to see that, but that was the way then. It's not like that anymore. But for us, it made us again looking at positive, because I think we tend to look at those yesteryear methods and think, that was dreadful and it was just terrible for a poor kid to be exposed to it. What it did for us, it made you want to work harder so that you don't remain standing when the other kids are sitting down because they got top marks. So there was some advantage in that, and as much it was done in that manner. So yeah, for me, I didn't feel at all that I was left behind, but that's where I learned that it is not about how late you start. It's a matter of starting, and you can always start whenever and just be the best you can be.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit brutal, isn't it? But also, you know, and I am always the one who feels sorry for the poor little soul who, you know, is left standing, you know, at the end. I think, you know, the one who might have done his best but just hasn't kind of managed to get that mark. So but I do understand what you're saying. If you're taking some positive from it, then I get that. But I just think that's so interesting. You know, we're so concerned, and like you said, you know, by the time you got to school, you were so ready to learn that you soaked it up like a sponge, but all of that learning that had happened before, and I don't think, and particularly in the UK, I don't know what it's like in South Africa, but certainly at the moment, I don't like the way our education is run at all. We don't put any value on anything that isn't tested. So, you know, and I'm a writer, so I've got a huge passion for literacy. I love reading, I love writing, but I genuinely don't believe that all learning has to be written down, and that just proves it, doesn't it? But if we kind of think, if you don't write it down and you don't do a test on it, then it's not valid, which is for me is utterly ridiculous. You know, all of that learning that you did before you got to school, you know, you were a goat herd, I mean, the amount of resilience you learn, you know, about, you know, surviving with not much food in your belly and being grateful when you did get food in your belly, and not having any shoes and worrying about where your home was going to be, you know, there or not there the next day. Those skills, I genuinely believe that set you up for later life. You had that resilience, you had that problem solving, you had, and I'm not suggesting, you know, that's, you know, there's a lot of disadvantages to that. That's a tough way to start, but you also learn a lot. We learn a lot from hardship and tough times, and also being sort of chucked in at the deep end. And I think sometimes when they go to school and it's like, well, you're going to learn this, you're going to do that, you're going to be tested on that, we're going to collect all this data. And then I think, but why? What actually, what are we, all we've got now is a load of data, but have we actually done any real, you know, have we taught these children to, there's a great thing about, I'll probably get this a little wrong, but there's a little boy who goes to school and the teacher says, today children, we're going to draw a flower, and this is how you draw a flower. You draw 4 red petals, you do a green stem and 2 green leaves, and then they do something else, and little Jimmy or whatever his name is, he goes to draw something. The teacher says, no, we don't do it like that. We draw 4 red petals, we draw a green stem, and we do 2 green leaves. And he goes through his school life, and then you know, each time he tries to draw the flower, he's told how to do it, and then eventually, I don't know if he goes to college or something like that, and they say to him, right, you're going to draw whatever you want, or draw what you see. And he sits down and he draws 4 red petals and a green stem and 2 green leaves. And the idea behind that story is that sometimes we're so keen to teach, and we're so keen to give information, and we're so keen that children come away with a skill, but we actually de-skill them because they don't have that desire to just try it. And if you draw something, it doesn't look anything like a flower, it doesn't matter. Or if you draw a dog or a cat, you know, we don't allow them that kind of independence, I don't think, by feeling the need to get. I was a deputy head teacher of a school once, and I got a bit into trouble for this. I got into trouble a lot, actually. But I said, what's happening here is the teachers are teaching to the evidence that they're going to collect. And the head teacher got a bit cross, and she said, but they shouldn't be doing that. That's not. But I said, but that's what they are doing, because they're so heavily judged on the evidence, you know, and what's in the book, and have you got your learning objective, and have you marked in pink and green, and have you got a picture, and have you got a photograph, and have you got a, you know, they are judged heavily on that. So what's happening is they're starting to teach to the evidence, and that is, for me, that's not learning. That's just data collection, isn't it?
It is. Oh yeah, no, it is data collection, and unfortunately, then that is definitely what makes people never to identify with what their passions are, because they have gone beyond the edge where they should be exploring and they should be finding themselves, a self-identity, because that's where it starts. Your passion follows with who do you believe you are, and what are the things that you've tried and tested, and like that example of a drawing, it's a perfect example, because yes, if we're given an opportunity, and we're a group of children given an opportunity to sketch things freely, you catch what is coming from your mind, so and what you see with your eyes, and what so that sort of has to tell the teacher, this child can either sketch things or draw things, or they can't.
And that's okay too.
And then try, So there's nothing wrong with that. No. And I think that's the problem that we make. And going back to that, and in my high school days as well, we got given a list of the subject combination, and obviously you go according to where you had scored your highest marks, and somehow I wanted to do English proper, and then we had the thing, we had part of it called English literature. So we walked into that class, and the teacher realized that she had too many of us. So and then she came, and then she decided, I can't have all of you in here. Some of you have to make a decision as to what other subjects you might want to take. And there was an option of doing commerce, and I'd not done commerce from the first 2 grades of high school. Now I'm at 3rd grade at high school, and I needed to start doing commerce, and commerce was hand in hand with accounting, so you had to have had a little bit of that. So because it was a forced subject, so that's the thing we're talking about. So when we are talking about the fixed education curriculum or syllabus or program, it feels to me like we are forcing these children to just to take a subject because it is there. It is, if it is in the syllabus, then you've got to learn it, and even if you wanted to. So I was forced into doing commerce, but luckily, to my advantage, it ended well, because I would have been very upset had I wanted to do literature and I realized that I wasn't doing well at commerce. But it was because of my working rate. I worked very hard to make sure that I passed the subject, which I still did, and up until I wrote it and during my final exams of O-level, and I got the highest marks. But it's a classic example of saying this is probably what the education system is doing. It does not explore a child's ability, and even on the subject matter, you find kids that are already passionate about either they love maths, and that's the one that really gives them the energy, and nobody just tends to follow that. That is the passion. And I realized that the only subject I was doing very well at and on was history, which I dropped when I needed to choose subjects that I would write as my final O-level exams. And then I realized quite later, actually, you were doing very well in history. It's only that you didn't realize that it was your passion at that time. Had I had someone that would have said, Sibusi, so I can see that you are doing it, you are excelling on the other subjects, but the one that you are doing well at, which is your passion, is history. And I never got someone to help me on that. So that's what we're trying to say here. That's the problem that educators, teachers face. If they are able to identify and help a child around that, to say, you know what, you scoring high marks on here because you understand the way we are teaching it, but your heart is here based on how they see you doing that. Then they could be helping you. Probably I could be a history professor somewhere at a university and doing something that I was passionate about on the education side of things. But yeah, very valid points there.
Yeah. Do you know, it's kind of feels like, you know, why is, and I understand that reading and writing is vital and basic maths is vital, but it's not crucial for everybody. Everybody does need to learn to read and write, because I think you're at a real disadvantage if you can't, and if you can't manage your finances and do, but if you're never going to be an author, if you're never going to be an accountant, that doesn't mean you'll have a less of a life than someone who isn't. It's like we say, these subjects are really important because we say so, and nothing else is important. And yet the world, you know, I always say the world is made up of so many different people. We need dustmen, and we need doctors, and we need nurses, and we need carers, and we need people who work in shops, and we need people who, I don't know, are gardeners and horticulturalists, and we need sportsmen, and we need musicians. We need that whole.
We do, yeah.
And it's sort of seen in education, I think, at the moment, and it needs quite a lot of courage to say we're not doing that. And my view is, if you went for a creative curriculum, the children who were your writers and mathematicians would still do that. They would still be able to excel but in a fun and creative way, but it wouldn't exclude those that maybe that isn't their path. But what you give them is a plan B, not the, right, you failed it, we've done this test over and over and over again, failed it every time, now you've left school, well, we don't really know what to do now, so never mind. That's kind of how it feels. And you know, I think right from an early age, all right, yeah, you wanted to be a footballer. Lots of little boys want to be girls, you know, want to be a footballer, don't they, or a ballet dancer, or you know, and some will maybe go on to be that and some may not. But I think what was relevant there is that you were obviously a very athletic, kinesthetic doer.
Yes.
You were a sporty person. So whatever, you know, it would have been quite, you know, unimaginable for you to end up in a 9 to 5, going to an office, sitting at a desk, because that doesn't feel like you. And there's a classic example. Do you know who Lewis Smith is? You know, the he's a gymnast anyway. He's a British gymnast. Okay. Yeah, and he won a silver at the Olympics. Really lovely young man. And he, I think he grew up in London. I think his mum was a single parent. They weren't particularly wealthy. And at school, he had ADHD. And I think there's lots of people who maybe could be on that spectrum. So they've got attention deficit. They're quite hyperactive, but that's just the way, not necessarily a label, but that's just the way they are. You know, they're quite lively. They're quite active. Just to someone who's maybe more passive and more studious. And his mum said he was a nightmare at school. He was always getting into trouble. He wasn't particularly academic. He couldn't get grips with whatever it was he was doing. And she enrolled him in gymnastics classes after school. Now he went on to be an Olympic champion. So
that's a classic story.
And he maybe didn't pass his English, and I bet he hasn't got an O level in whatever, I don't know, you know, whatever he did, but you can't tell me he's a failure, is he? You know, he's won an Olympic medal for his country. So why, and in society, our children and our young people, we look up to musicians, we revere sports people, don't we? We revere all these people, and we don't put value on it. And I've known children literally in school, Sibu, this makes me so cross, children who are maybe really good at sport or PE but not so good at English will be taken out of PE to do more English. And I'm like, don't do it, you know, allow them to do, you know, it frustrates me. I just think it, and what are you doing there? You're, like you say, you're saying, you know, can you imagine being a mechanic? I can't imagine you being a car mechanic. You know, you'd have been trying to fit in the shoes of somebody. You might have been quite good at it, you might have all right life, you might not have been totally miserable. You wouldn't, it'd be like you're wearing someone else's clothes, isn't it? It's not quite
Absolutely.
you.
No.
You know, so I think that's really
I'd be sick.
yeah, it's not you, is it? But that and I think also partly it feels like to me your childhood was obviously rural, so it's a lot more I don't mean wild as in running around like a loony, but you know, there was that freedom and that wildness of the place where you lived. So you probably unwittingly had that more freedom to just explore and be and kind of survive and get by and live a bit on your wits. So you had all of that stuff, albeit from quite a difficult place. But I don't think that's always such a bad thing. I mean, obviously without the kind of, you know, the food situation and all of that, but that wildness, we've got a massive surge in this country of forest schools because people are realizing that wildness, that freedom, that independence is really crucial. Going and like you say, finding out who you are.
Oh well, absolutely. No, but one of the examples I used was when I got the opportunity to get the interview at the nature reserve. I've never studied animals or wild animals. I never studied birds or trees or anything. But I always say the reason I was able to answer the questions and identify some of the animals and the birds that were that were being displayed, because part of it had to be oral. You know, the guy would be saying, asking you, what is this tree? What is this bird? And the other thing, which again going back because of the wilderness part of it, being vast and wild and open and free to explore, they would ask you if they showed you a tree and they would say, this tree does bear fruits. Are they edible or they're poisonous? And I won't have known that if I wasn't a kid that was growing up in the bushveld looking after goats and cattle. And I learned a lot. I knew which ones were poisonous, which ones you could survive on and eat. And so I learned quite a lot from that. So in a way, I think it just fitted nicely that I just fell back into conservation, because I was back into the wilderness, and I enjoyed it so much because I just became passionate about it. Going back to passion, because I remember when I met John, I had taken him on this hike, and I would show him some of the medicinal plants which I knew you could use to treat easy remedies like cough or flu. And I would eat some of the fruits during the summer that you could eat, and he would say to me, "There's no way I could know that I could eat this." And because of my growing up in there, at a very young age, I was able to experiment and explore these things. And obviously, with other boys who were much older at times, they told you that this you can eat, this you can't eat. And so there was a lot of knowledge, there was a lot of learning from that. And my upbringing, the first 10 years of my life, shaped me to live the life I live today.
Absolutely.
It was that. It was just that. Being out there and the hardship. When I sit back down and think deeply about it, I always say, you have gone to achieve what you've achieved, and we've been able to persevere through hardships and through difficulties, and you've been able to have the resilience that you need to succeed, purely because of you were able to do that as a small child, just before the age of 10. So for me, that is a very crucial stage for every child. In fact, as we know, those are the developmental years, and it's a question of you want to develop them in a much more broader term, of the sense that when they get to a stage where they come to a stage where they need to go free and do their own things, they have fully developed and they know what they want, they have identified with what their passions are. And again, I'll go back to saying, unfortunately or sadly, the fixed education system that is there does not help them to do that.
No.
Right? Just that's probably why we would always have this lingering problem, where people walk out of high school, they don't even know. Even if they go to university, they spend a good 3, 4, 5 years, and then they just sit with a qualification that does not serve them because it is not them. It's a thing that they needed to have. It's okay to have a piece of paper as reference, but if it is not your passion, then you will be miserable in it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think as well, particularly in this country, we sort of not too bad at it in early years. There's a lot of like continuous provision and then as soon as they get into sort of year one, bearing in mind they're 5, and that primary years from 5 to 11, it's almost like we've ditched all of that play, because you can't be playing now, you know, you can't. And children learn so much through play. You know, they learn to communicate, they learn to mimic, they learn to explore. There's so much that happens. I mean, that could be a whole subject in itself. But I mean, I have a real issue with the year 6 children, bearing in mind just before they go to secondary school, these children are sort of 10 and 11, and they spend that whole year revising for their SATs test. Why? To collect a load of data. To me, that's a waste of a year, you know, to revise, pass a test. That, and my son did worked in a secondary school for a little while, and he said we don't even use those SATs tests particularly. We assess them when they come. So that's just data collection, and we're just saying, right, you know, you've got to do if you do this, then you're this, you know. And I'm not against testing in general, because I think sometimes assessment can be great, because you can say, right, this is where you are, what can I do to help you get to your next stage, or what can I do to but it's too prescriptive. So before we sort of wrap the interview up, there's a couple of questions I want to ask you. What can we do? How can we help young people to find their strengths and skills? You can say, what are the crucial things we need to do to help children with that self-exploration? And part sort of B of that question, can that work in school? I know what I think. I'll let you say what you think.
Yes. How can we help children to sort of identify with a passion? I think this is now for both parents, mums and dads, and teachers, because teachers are spending pretty much equal more time with the children as their parents do. So for me, what can teachers do is to be observant. Just look at the child, try and explore the child when the child is trying to explore themselves. So when you allow them the opportunity to go outside and play, just be observant of where are their strengths? What is the one thing that when you mention to them, their eyes just brighten up and they light up? Because that probably could be the way that they would have to be helped upon to try and develop that skill, and then you give them the tools to do that. So in my opinion, that was what we need to do. In as much as we are very mindful, we should be mindful of the safety elements of it. We're not saying that we just need to let children go wild and we unsafe. The level of safety has to be there, but we don't want to impose the limitations, because I do have a phrase where I say, well, the limitations are in 2 parts, in my opinions. There are those that are self-imposed. Those are for people that decide that they will want to impose limitations to themselves. And then other ones are imposed by others, which are conditioned. I don't think you want to condition a child to think that they have limits, they have limitations. And we tend to do that when we say to them, don't do that. No, you cannot do that. You're not allowed to do that. And you don't even explain why, and you don't go into the detail of it. So I think we should not impose limitations on the children because it tends to be the case. So for me, that's a responsibility of teachers not to do that. They should be aware when they are handling them, when they're treating them, that is this conditioning the child mentally to be retarded, to think that this is the only level of performance they can do, or this is as far as they can only possibly go, or this is as high as they can possibly dream. No, we shouldn't do that. I think our responsibility is just to open them up to the big world that has no limits. And it is up to us to do that. We tell them you have no limits. We tell them you can do anything you want to do. We tell them that you have unlimited potential. So therefore, don't limit yourself, and we can be able to help them around that. But the biggest for me is just we need to pay attention. Let us observe. Let us just look at them. When we let them explore, we'll just watch. And instead of us giving them the data to take, let us just collect the data and analyze that data about that particular child and say, this is what I think. And then if in fact we can even go a step further and say, go with the parent and say, I've been watching your child over the period that I've been with them as my student. And this is my observations. What are your observations? And then maybe try and compare with the mum or the dad to say, what have you observed about the child? What are their natural abilities? And what do you think their passions might be going into the future based on what you're observing? Because your passions comes from what your abilities, your creativity comes from your being able to be active to do things and what is being observed. But unfortunately, I don't think we keep that data as parents and as teachers.
We do a bit, but I just want to say I was interested by what you said. Most teachers worth their salt will say, you're great, you can do anything you want, be the best you can, you know, you've got no limits, you can do this. And then we go, but today we're going to do phonics, and then we're going to do English, and then we're going to do maths, and we're going to do it like this, and in the afternoon we might do a bit of science. So we're sort of saying, you can do anything you want, but we've just got to do all this, you know. So, and I think it needs a lot of courage for schools to turn around and to have faith that, you know, if we don't follow the scheme, we, you know, say we were doing, I don't know, we were doing a topic on birds, for example, I don't know, but we, you know, and the scheme says, right, you've got to do section 1, and then you've got to do section 2, and then you've got to do section 3. Some of those sections might be really valid, but it also might be valid to go out and lay in a field with a pair of binoculars and just stare up at the sky. It might also be valid, you know, and I genuinely think, like, you know, I said you did think this can be achieved in schools. Teachers are under an inordinate amount of pressure, and it needs to come from the top to say, I'm going to trust that you can do this. And, you know, I think with writing, you know, we say, well, we're going to write for a purpose, but we don't really give them enough experience. If we sort of stopped worrying about the writing and worried about the experience, the writing would come. And I have real issues with the way writing is taught nowadays. You know, we've got young kids learning about fronted adverbials and subordinate clauses, and, you know, I've seen teachers deliver writing lessons and saying, right, in your first paragraph you need to put an exclamation mark, in your second paragraph you need to put a subordinate clause, in your third paragraph. I'm like, what if they don't need an exclamation mark in their first paragraph? They might not want one, you know. But and that is where we're losing. Actually, if you went out and, you know, you were passionate about it and you felt it and you explored it and you loved it and your eyes lit up when you talked about it, I firmly believe if you can talk, you can write. You might need someone to help you. You might need someone to scribe. You might need to type it. Your handwriting might be dreadful, but you don't, when you talk, you don't think, oh, I don't talk to you, Sibu, and think, do I need a subordinate clause when I talk to you? I don't care. You know, it just comes out, doesn't it? So, but that's because I've got all of this knowledge and all of this passion and all of this stuff I want to share. But if children had all of this stuff they wanted to share, and like you say, were motivated about it, then it would. You've just got to have faith that it will follow. So I do believe it can be done in school, but I think it's going to take a bit of courage and a bit of bravery, and I think it's about variety. I think it's about, and I genuinely believe, and again we can go on, we'll talk about this in later podcasts about inclusion, but I think if you provide an open and creative space for everybody will get something from that, but maybe on different levels. So one of your children might think, you know what, I'm the next David Attenborough, I'm leaping through the forest with me binoculars and I'm loving this. And another child might think, I just want to sit under the tree and read a book. And another child might be scrabbling in the undergrowth for bugs. And another child might be just climbing the trees. And another child might be counting the pebbles, you know, but everybody will get something, but it might be different. And I think with education at the moment, we're expecting to deliver the same, and for everybody to get the same, and everybody to be the same, and everybody to come out the same. And that is, that to me. What's the point of that?
That can never happen. Well, we try to do it that way. We try to let it happen that way, but unfortunately it backfires because we are all different, and that's why we can never be the same. And it will come down to even when you're doing the tests, and the results will show that we're not the same. Others will be among the top, and then there will be the bottom, the bottomless ones. So that's the diversity of who we are and what we are, and therefore we can't just all sort of assign to the one system and say no, all of us, everybody has to do that. But yes, it will take a lot of courage to be able to change it, or in a way or the other bring in some balance. I think that is what we're missing. Someone needs to realize that we need to balance this thing up, where we should understand that someone will like this and then other people will like this side. So how do we balance that up? And then we find a way to do it, because quite frankly, we are not doing that at the moment.
No, we're not. No. Oh, that's been, what a wonderful discussion. So just before we go, Sibu, leave us with your why your top reason. Why do you think it's important to follow your passion?
Why do I think it is important for all of us, for anybody to follow their passion? First of all, it makes your life much more fun, interesting, and exciting. And it gives you energy. And with passion, you don't give up, because if you're passionate about what you are doing, you will not give up. So what those are my three, that is why we need to follow our passions. You get excited about it, and you're happy to do it, and you can just push yourself doing it. But more than that, you will never give up on doing something that you're passionate about. So that's where you would draw the strength to persevere, with resilience, with determination, with hope that you will succeed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And you can find Sibusiso on all of the social media platforms. You're on Facebook, aren't you? On Twitter, on Instagram. Are you on there as Sibusiso Villani, aren't you? On all of those platforms? Yeah.
Yes, except on Twitter, except on Instagram, because I was overtaken by someone when I came with another Villani. So and the Sibusiso for that matter. So on Instagram, I am Sibusiso.Villani. So
wonderful, wonderful. I was quite surprised. There's quite a lot of Sibusisos out there. I hadn't heard the name before, so that's wonderful. And
I will tell you what it means. It is the reason there's so many of us. It's because it's mainly common with the Zulus, the Xhosas, when Nelson Mandela's tribe also uses that, and then the Swazis. But it's a biblical name. It literally translates to blessing.
Oh wow, that's wonderful.
Sibusiso means blessing.
Wonderful. Oh, what a fabulous story. That's wonderful. I love that. And Sibu has written a book, To the Top from Nowhere, which you can find on Amazon, and he also has a website, which is, give us the address of that, Sibu.
Yes, my website is www.sibusisovillani.co.za.
Wonderful, thank you. And if you want to find out more about my creative learning resources and my thoughts on learning and how to inspire you as an educator and your pupils, you can find me at www.writesmarteducation.co.uk. You can also find me on Facebook at Write Smart Education, and I'm on Twitter as Kay Stanley Writes and Karen Stanley Author on Instagram, and I've got a few children's books out there as well if you are interested. So thank you very much for joining me, Sibu. We'll see you all again next week. Next week we'll be talking about the power of nature and the environment. So thanks for joining us, and see you again soon. Right, there we go. That's one. That's one. So you happy to do one more?
Yes, we can do another one. Yes.
Yeah, and then we're sort of good. We're good for like 4 weeks then, and then we can when you come back, if you want to do some more. You don't have to do it every week, but whenever you want to do it, it's good with me. So I think
of course.
I think people will love it. Okay. So this one, we're going to talk about nature and the environment. So we're going to talk about, so maybe you could talk about why or how you became, because you said you weren't really, although you were a goat herd, you weren't really that into the environment. You didn't really get engaged in that until sort of later on. So maybe you can talk about how you became interested, why you became interested, how relevant that is obviously for mountain climbing. You're very reliant on nature and the seasons and the weather and all that kind of thing. And what you think the benefits of being passionate about nature and the environment are, and how it can stimulate creativity. I talk a lot about mindfulness and how it can kind of inspire and all of that, and how those skills can transfer into other areas of your life. Is that all right?
Yes. Okay. Awesome.
Right, so here we go. Okay. Hello and welcome again to Write Smart, the Creative Learning Podcast. I'm Karen Stanley, and I'm joined again today by the fantastic Sibusiso Villani. He is our wonderful Mount Everest climbing African who has so much inspiration and motivational stories to share with us, and he has some wonderful thoughts about education and why it's important to live a life without limits. So we're delighted to have him join us here again this week. We feel very honoured to do that, and we're going to talk this week about nature and the environment. I myself, I'm a little bit late to the party. I was never really a naturalist, never particularly an environmentalist. I did a master's in environmental conservation whilst I was teaching a few years ago, mainly because I thought it was a good idea at the time, and I had this sort of notion about maybe doing nature trails for children, because I've always had a passion about getting children outside and getting them kind of moving and active and just exploring the world, but I never really did much with it. And then really the last few years I did some educational outreach for a water company, which involved lots of river dipping and pond dipping and talking about water conservation, and it was just a wonderfully inclusive and creative and practical way to get children from all walks of life involved. So I have some very sort of strong views about how beneficial I think nature and the environment can be to our mental health and well-being, to cognitive development, to our learning in general. And I do lots of sessions that involve mindfulness, which mindfulness and writing go pretty much hand in hand, and mindfulness and nature, it's very difficult to see where one begins and another one ends. So welcome, Sibu, and perhaps you could tell us a little bit, because you weren't always a conservationist really, were you? So how did you get involved?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, thank you very much indeed for having me and for asking. No, I wasn't. I wasn't a It's funny because if I show the story this way, I had just walked out of high school with my O-level certificate in my hand, and I went around writing to people for a job. It was a job anywhere, and you know, in those olden days, and my children have got this different way of job application. They say they just they post something online, or they send their CV online. We never did that. In as much as we had CVs, you will attach a CV, you print it out and put it into an envelope, and still write a letter with 2 addresses, DSN, all of those things, looking for employment. And I sent hundreds of those letters randomly to random companies. But anyway, the first was obviously me getting a job as a manual laborer in a construction company. And I spent 2.5 years grafting and really working very hard, and I hated it. I didn't like it, but I learned one very important lesson there, that again, you can't do something that you don't like, because it is energy draining. You want something that excites you, that gives you energy. And I didn't know what that would be. So it just, because of my desperation, it prompted me to keep on writing. And funny enough, in those days, you wouldn't go to the internet, because we had a telephone directory or book with all addresses. So I thought I'd run out of addresses that I knew randomly in my head. So I took out a book. I was just paging through the book, looking for companies and organizations that I can write letters to and apply. And I saw an address. And again, this is where I was thinking about it the other day and saying, I don't know how many times we follow our instinct, because for me, when I saw that address and it said, "You write to them." And it was the name of a nature reserve in Swaziland, where I didn't even know what job I would get. But the prompting from my instinct was, "You write to them." So I looked at the address and copied it as it is, and I wrote to them. I sent the letter through. A reply came back weeks later, and they said that no, we don't have any job opportunities at the moment, but we will keep our letters in our files just in case something come up. So I thought, well, you won't get anything from them anyways. Anyway, I started, never gave up writing to people. I never wrote back to Maloloja. And then I got another letter that looked very similar, and I thought, I received a reply from them. I wonder what they're saying. And they were calling me for the job interview. So I just thought, well, I'll take the risk, go there and find out what happens in a nature reserve. And I'd never started reading about it because I didn't think I was going to get a job. But again, with my upbringing as a little head boy and going into the bush, I knew a lot about animals. I knew a lot about birds, about trees, and that put me in good stead to be able to pass the interview, which is what I did. So I remember very well in 1993 when the senior warden, who was the man who ran the thing and did the interview, interviewed me, says to me, "Ah, Mr. Villano, well done. You've got yourself a job as a tourist officer and game ranger." So you're excited about this thing, but at the same time, you've got hundreds of questions in your head. I wonder what rangers do. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But I wanted to take the risk, and then I thought, well, I said goodbye to the construction company, and I went to Maloloja Nature Reserve and became a tourist officer. So that was the start of it. But I grew to enjoy it because as game rangers, then we were living with the animals. We lived in the game reserve in a rangers camp, obviously, and we had zebra, we had impala, we had elephants coming into the nature reserve, and lots of the other smaller animals, and it was very peaceful, and it was just comfortable. There was no traffic, and I enjoyed talking to people, telling them what they would see when they're doing their walks in the game reserve. So I realized that it is something that I needed to start looking at and reading about nature and reading more about the trees and reading more about the animals. And my fascination about it was I found birds to be very difficult to learn to identify. So I gave myself a little challenge that I wanted to identify them by the calls they made. So
Right.
I would just hear the bird and I would go and have a look at it and try and record that. And that became my interest. And I loved it because I could just hear the bird calling and I would say, oh, that is that. And for me, that was something that was quite unique. And I did that. And so I sort of varied it from, okay, for birds, this is what I like. For animals, this is what I like about them. And it just made my time in a nature reserve fascinating. And I spent 12 years in total. It was 7 years in Maloloja Nature Reserve and then 5 years in another establishment, which was now, this is a big game park where you've got everything. Lions, leopards, rhino. And then I was then a full-time or full-fledged game ranger guiding, where I would take people on a vehicle and show them these animals. And it was just great joy and it was just great fun. And we also did walks where you walked on foot and out with a guide carrying a gun. It was just energy giving, knowing that a lion might jump at you at any time. So it was just fascinating. And that was my introduction to nature and nature conservation and spending time in nature and growing to appreciate and nature. But to sort of exit that point, I remember when I met John. John is a friend of mine who then introduced me into climbing. When he invited me to go on a hike at a different place than my one where I worked, because where I was working, I think we were taking it for granted that we work here. For us, it was work, even though we walked. It wasn't like you were on a holiday. So we went and we traveled to South Africa because we were both in Swaziland, and we went on a trail. It was a mountain trail, and we went up and for a long time. It was a full day, one day's walk up And I remember stopping at one of the points, trying to catch breath because we were just powering up this hill. And I turned and I looked behind me and I saw this beautiful scenery of the mountain grassland. It was so beautiful that it just hit me very strongly to say, oh, that is the reason why people go to nature. That's why they go to mountain. That's why they go to hike. That's why they come to your place. I was like, oh yeah, now I know why people come and play and pay to come and spend time in the game reserve. That's just because it is so beautiful. And so from that day, I've looked at nature very differently and with a very different eye.
You need to, I think it's really important, you need to immerse yourself in it, don't you, to appreciate it. And I think certainly, you know, in these days we're worried about global warming and we're worried about the planet and we're worried about plastic pollution and all of that sort of stuff. And I think for young people, they need to, in order to care about that, in order for that to have any kind of resonance with them, they need to be immersed in it. Because it's like looking in the shop window at the shoes. Until you try them on, you don't really love them, do you? You know, it's that kind of, you've got to kind of get involved. And I do think for lots of people, for me probably a little bit, it's a little bit of an epiphany moment. It's a bit like, this is rather fantastic. And I do a lot of mindfulness writing, and mindfulness is really, you know, some people think it's a bit hippie and everybody running through fields in sort of flowing long hair and flowers in their hair. But what mindfulness is, it's just really about being mindful and about taking the time to be present in your own life. Because, I mean, I've sort of likened this sometimes to, you know, like you can drive on a car journey, can't you? You can get to your destination and you can't even remember the journey. You don't know how you've got there. You've sort of done it on autopilot. And I think our lives can be so busy sometimes that we're trying to juggle a million things. We're trying to do this, do that, do something else and run home and do that. We forget to enjoy the here and now. And actually, I think this probably is a bit of age speaking a little bit, but you start to realise that the here and now is all that there is. You know, if you're always worried about the destination, you forget to enjoy the journey, and life is about the journey, isn't it? It sounds a bit corny, but and I think that's what we need to help young people to do, is to value the journey rather than saying, well, you've got to get here, you've got to pass that test, you've got to do that, you've got to do. And don't get me wrong, we all need goals, we all need things to strive for, we all need targets because that's what keeps us motivated. But we also need to enjoy the journey, enjoy the here and now. I think it's a much more contented person that enjoys the journey than he's always. There's one old tale, isn't there, about the man. There's a man sitting on a jetty and he's fishing and he's catching fish, and this in a remote, I don't know, somewhere, you know, remote. And this businessman comes up and he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm just sitting here catching fish, you know." And he says, "Well, you know, do you eat?" "Yeah, well, I catch the fish and I eat them for my tea." And the businessman says, "What you need to get a boat. You can sail out onto the river or the lake and you can catch more fish, and then you can sell them and you can make some money, and then you can employ some people and you can catch even more fish and you can sell more fish and you can make more money, and then you can buy a bigger house and you can, you know, you can live luxury, and then you know, you'll have loads of free time. And what are you going to do with your free time?" And the bloke says, "I'm going to come and do some fishing." So it's kind of, you know, like what we're missing. You know, it's really good to have those targets, but also really important not to lose sight of what's important. And actually, the more we realise, you know, this planet, we're blessed to live here. We've only got one. You know, and it's so important. You know, it's sort of like tidying your bedroom, isn't it? It's important that we look after it and we live in that nice environment. And now's the time to do it, I think. And so I think not only is it important for young people to respect and be immersed in it to really realise the true value, but also it can bring so much, you know, like particularly in lockdown, it's been tough for lots of people, and I'm lucky to live in a place where I can go walking, and we've got this huge dog that, you know, loves to walk and all of that. But it's made me really appreciate. There's been lots of times when I've literally just sat and looked at the sea, or I've just looked at the clouds and thought, "Oh, they look amazing today," or you know, my husband jokes, if we go for a walk now, it's like going for a walk with David Attenborough, because I keep leaping out of bushes with my camera and say, look, there's a bug on the floor. And he's like, oh, okay. I think when you're open to it, you know, that inspiration, you're open to that inspiration. Once you start to let it in and you feel it, it just comes and comes and comes. And I think that is, if we were more keen to let children be immersed in nature and explore, they would get that inspiration. And then I think that really translates into other areas of your life, like with you, you know, that you're just looking back and seeing the mountain and thinking, wow, this is amazing, I get it now. It made you want to do other stuff, and it gave you skills to prepare for you. That, would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I would agree with that. Well, I do believe that the younger they are, the better for them to in later stages to protect nature, because they've been there. And it is good to see that there are some young people who are stepping up into the plate today to make all these noises about, hey, we need to look after our planet. We need to look at what we are doing to nature. But that is because they are learning, and they are observant. They're seeing the destructions that is happening around nature. But it's even much more if we take them to experiment and experience and be in nature, because then when that edge, that energy to stand up and protect it comes from what they know and what they have connected with. And that connection can only happen when they are given the opportunity to go to nature and to feel the energy that nature has got. Because it's different to say, we know that we get from trees we get oxygen, or they photosynthesis that is happening there, and to for some parts of the world we get timber and all of those things. It is okay to understand that, but the most important thing is for one to walk in nature, in a natural in a natural environment, in a forest, in a desert, on a mountain, to be able to connect with it. And for me, those are the things that in nature has given me. It has made me feel humbled, because when you come to the bottom of a mountain, whether it's a trail, with all your young and energy and ego, and I'm going to run up this mountain, and then halfway up you're huffing and puffing, you're breathless, and you can't breathe, and some of the other mountains people are really seriously sick, then it teaches you to respect nature, because it has that energy. And in my experiences, I've experienced nature's energy in very frustrating ways. One of which being stuck in a little tent on the slopes of Mount Everest, where nature threatened to kill us, and I couldn't do anything. That was one of the lessons. That is one of the things that I say, if young people were to be able to understand nature and its energy by being there. I'm not saying to mountains, but the energy is everywhere. Because if you can't breathe when you are walking up a little hill, it's because the nature is overcoming you as a human being. That's why you can't breathe, because it has got that energy to fit you. Because obviously it exposes you to how fit you are and how prepared you were to go up, which is still the same. But these are lessons that nature can teach us. So it is very important. And I think, because now I go every now and then, there is some healing that you get as a human being or as a person. Nature, I've decided, I remember the other time I went, not a few weeks ago, I went in this forest, and I was just walking on this trail, and there was this river. I was just running down, you could just hear the water, and at the same time you could hear the birds singing, and then I just saw these trees. It was so refreshing, and I ended up coming back to saying, you know what, nature is therapy. It's just being in unison with nature. But it can never happen when you are sitting indoors. When you're sitting at home, you've got to go there and to get the benefits. So that's why the encouragement to young people and the encouragement to parents themselves and even teachers at school is just to try and have excursions like that where children go to be one with nature, and so that they can fully understand what nature is and what it gives a person. And so but at times you leave them to explore that themselves. I think we just need to expose them. And that's the one thing we need to do, just expose them to what's out there, expose them to nature, and then they are able to make their own decisions. But the most important thing is we human beings and nature are one. We need to understand that. And therefore, we need to have the mindset and the disciplines to be able to look after our environment, to look after our natural resources, which we've inherited. I think that's where the debate is today, to say that if you are a child who's growing up, it's a question of if you have inherited the nature that you have right now, are you going to look after it so that your own children and your own great grandchildren can inherit, can find it? So that's the one thing that gets me thinking every now and then. That is the one thing that gets me involved with conservation and rhino conservation, elephants conservation, lion conservation, because I always say it will be such a shame for me personally to one day say that I was able to see a lion with my eyes in the wilderness, in nature, but now because of our actions and our irresponsibility, they are no more, and kids will only see a picture of a lion in a book. I say that would be such a shame for me to do that. So if we encourage young people to have that feeling, to say, you're looking at this giraffe, if you are not looking after it, it might not be there one day. So would you be excited when you say, oh, to your grandchildren, I saw a giraffe with my eyes, and you can't see it anymore because we've let it go. So I think those are the messages we need to send out, so that we need to sort of evoke those thinking. Like, future generations, will they be able to experience nature the way you're experiencing it today? Because I will hate it when we can't say, oh, no one has to go to the wilderness place anymore because there's no more wilderness place, there's no more nature to enjoy.
I think there's some important points there. I mean, I think part of the beauty of nature when it comes to learning is because it's a natural environment. There's no technology, obviously. And I think part of the problem, and I'm not against technology, I don't much love it myself, but I'm not against it. But I mean, it's a great tool for, it's opened our world up in some fantastic ways. But I think some of the danger of that is children are spoon fed a lot of stuff. So if you watch a film, you don't have to do anything. It comes into your life and it's spoon fed. If you play a video game, when you sort of go on social media, everything's kind of spoon fed. So you don't really have to use your imagination. You don't really have to investigate much. You don't really have to search out. It's all kind of coming at you, which I don't think is always a good thing. I think that can be an issue. I also think that, as children particularly, they're very sensory beings. So when you first have a baby, their sensory exploration start, and you'll know, as parents, we all know this, don't we? From birth, they learn, when you kiss a baby's face, or you tickle them, or you nibble on their chubby arms, or whatever, all of that sensory kind of stimulation is how they learn about the world around them. It's how they experience, how they feel pleasure, pain, excitement, all of that. And when you go into nature, you've got all of that sensory stimulation. You've got the elements, you've got the breeze, you've got the sunshine, you've got the rain, you've got the sort of the crunch of the leaves under your foot, you've got the feel of the bark, you've got the noises and so you've got all of that sensory, and that does quite something. I mean, I'm not a doctor or a brain surgeon, but it does something really quite, special inside your brain. It's creating all of these sort of pathways and synapses, which is really, really crucial for a child's development. And I would say as well, on that note, I think it also gives them tools to deal with emotional issues or struggles. You know, I know if I'm having and it usually is IT that sends me into this kind of a funk where I feel like I want to take the hand to the laptop. What I can do is go for a walk or go and, you know, it's a brilliant diversion. And I've said this before, you'll know, as a runner, when you run, you don't expect to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, your rest is just as important. Or climbing Everest, your rest is just, when you talk about those rotations, when you're going up and down the same little bit all the time, because your rest is just as important as your activity. And that's true for your brain as well. And yet we expect our brain and our children's brains to be engaged and thinking and, you know, processing and kind of all of this, all that overly stimulated, when actually what we need to teach children to do is to take that mindfulness break, to take a brain break, to give themselves a bit of time, to give them, you know, just a bit of space to just be and to just breathe. I think that's really crucial. And without exception, I can honestly say I've worked with lots of children over the years who quite often have been in the care system, or quite often have got emotional behavioural difficulties, or they just don't quite fit in, or life is just in a not a good place, or they just don't fit the mould, or for whatever challenges they're up against. And without exception, when we've got to the point where one boy in particular was threatening to place a snooker cue in a not so comfortable position on my body, but you know, whenever we've got to that stage, we always go outside without fail. You know, I had one little boy he'd had a terrible time. He was in the foster care system. He'd seen some dreadful stuff. And violence and aggression was his only mechanism for dealing with anything, because he didn't really know. And he was quite young. We spent hours on the beach looking for crabs with our little bucket. Now, this is a boy who couldn't concentrate for more than 5 minutes. This is the boy who would run off. This is the boy who lashed out. This is a boy, and don't get me wrong, he was still a tricky customer. But going outside, it just diffuses everything. I quote this example all the time, and I might have said this to you before. when I was doing the outreach for the water company, we were in a river, and rivers are quite dangerous, aren't they? Because they're deep and they're full of water. And, you know, there's litter that you need to watch, and all of that stuff. So straight away, we talked earlier, didn't we, about, you know, the risk, and we're not suggesting that you know, we'll just scale that mountain and it'll be fine. But, you know, eventually that's a dangerous environment. But I was saying to them, right, you can't go past that point because it really is deep. Can't go there because the trout are nesting and you'll upset the trout, and please mind the stinging nettles. And that was really about as much instruction as I gave them. If your wellies fill up with water, don't worry about it, we'll tip them in. This is how you use the net, go for it, you know, knock yourself out, have a great time. And this boy turned up and his teacher said he's been a nightmare. He's been in inclusion, which basically means the isolation all week, because he can't focus. He can't engage, he can't get through a lesson without hitting someone, he can't do this, he can't do that. It was a whole list of can'ts, what he can't do, and he nearly didn't come. And then he concentrated for at least an hour in a river, which is a dangerous environment. He didn't hit anybody. In fact, quite the reverse, he was helping other children because he was the best at that. At one point, running up the river with a fish in his hands, here, miss, I've got another fish. He was like Bear Grylls, you know. But he was amazing, and that gave me the opportunity to say, you are amazing, look how brilliant you are, look how wonderfully you've looked after that fish, look how great, you know, thank you for helping these children, thank you for doing, you know. And he became 2 foot taller because of his self-esteem. He had been able to succeed at something where everything else was in place that meant he didn't succeed, so he became more obstinate and oppositional. And I know it's not always possible to take them into a river, but you go out on the playground, go and make snow angels in the snow, just go and do something that diffuses that tension. And, you know, people say, well, we haven't got time for that. Well,
no, we must make this.
You know, we haven't got time. Well, but what you're going to have to make time for is when he's rampaging around the class, hitting everyone and telling you you're an idiot. That you're going to have to make time for that, because it's happening. So, you know, I just think nature is such a leveler. and it levels everybody. It doesn't matter if you're the, you know, you're the athletic little Sibu who would want to run around the woods and climb up the trees, or you're me who'd like to sit under the tree and read a book, you know, as a child. We all get something from it, and what we also get is empathy, and all of those skills translate. I'm always saying, you know, you give me one activity, simple as you like. Give me an activity, right? We're walking 10 foot on a path, and I will give you at least 5 learning opportunities for that. You know.
Oh yeah, no, there's lots. There's lots.
You know, there's so every activity, there is loads of learning, and most of it won't be written down, and most of it won't be on a scheme, but it's still valuable. So I know I could sort of get on my soapbox a bit about that, but I just think nature and the environment, it should be that first, and worry about the other stuff, because the other stuff will just sort of happen, I think.
Yes,
personally.
Absolutely. I agree 100% with you, Karen. There's so much. Once you realize that when you are in nature, you need to be there. There's a lot that you can learn, and nature does it naturally. You don't even have to instruct or a teacher to say anything. You just take them there. Nature takes the lead. Nature teaches them, and then you will find them looking at things, and only then can you just watch and observe. Because when they are picking up a little stone and looking at it, it means they are connecting with that particular subject. And then when they're looking at a flower and they trying to either pick up the scent or look at it, they're connecting with that. When they're looking at a bird that has just flown above, and they're like, oh, that's an eagle, or the sound, or what is that? Or all of those things, those are the little things that nature uses just to sort of get into our brain, sort of interfere with it, such that we just decluttered all the other stuff we have, and then it purifies the way we think. By the time you spend half an hour to an hour in nature, you go back to your busy lifestyle, you feel lost completely, because it is so refreshing, and then it is so vibrating that you just feel like, oh, what have I done to myself, when you suddenly find yourself sitting back to where you were with lots of chaos that does not teach you anything. So nature in that way has got a lot that to give, but I think it is up to us who are responsible to expose the children to nature. We owe it to them that we must, and if we do that, we are helping them. Because I mean, as we say, for me, nature has been my biggest teacher. Most of the life lessons I've learned, most of the things I've learned about myself, I've not been taught by any person. It was just through nature, because I've been there. It's taught me a lot, and it taught me that actually the biggest lesson, comparing nature and human beings, is that nature is actually more superior than we are, and we think we are, but we deceive ourselves. And children will help a child to be able to recognize that, and to identify and accept that when it comes to nature, I'm a nothing. And it will only take them going into nature to experiment and feel that and see the threats. I mean, if you go to a wilderness trail and you get caught in an afternoon storm with lightning and thunder, or hailstorm or anything, or even a heavy blizzard or snowfall, and you're just running helter-skelter to look for shelter, that is you giving to nature, to succumbing, to say, you know, I'm being very obedient. I know that you are in charge, you are in control. That's why we do it, because it just gives you the respect that nature deserves. But more than that, it teaches us a lot of lessons about how we can live in unison with nature and ourselves, and what to respect and what to do and what not to do. So we will be doing an injustice to a child if we just hold them back and say we'll never give them the opportunity to do that. And so that's why we talk about these things, so that young people can know that nature is the way to go. That's nature is therapy. It is an educator, and it equalizes, as you say. And it has done that. I've led people to a big mountain where top CEOs of companies, and people asked me, how are you going to deal with their egos? And I said, well, I know how I'm going to deal with their egos. Nature will take control,
Yeah.
and it will just humble them. And some of them say it. I never even mentioned anything. I said, we have a mountain to climb. Doesn't matter whether you are a CEO of a big company, they're here. We do it nature's way, and nature will allow you the opportunity to do what it wants you to do. And if nature doesn't want you to summit a Mount Everest, nature will stop you from doing that. So
Yeah.
this is the growth that we get from nature, and it equalizes. So when it comes to nature, we are the same.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And the skills that you learn on is, they're just so transferable into all areas of your life. You've got resilience, you've got respect, you've got perseverance, you've got empathy, you've got, you know, and those, I think that's the trouble with education a bit. Those aren't seen as, what's seen as skills is reading, writing. You know, we used to be, my nan used to call it the 3 R's: reading, writing and arithmetic. But, you know, like those are the things that are, you know, that's important because you've written that down. We've talked about this before, and that's important because we've tested that. That's important. But, you know, if you, and I do work with the school, I do careers advice, so trying to, you know, again, learning about what are your skills and talents, playing to your natural skills and talents, which is what we talked about before. And, you know, you might think empathy, well, that's a bit, you know, it's a bit wafty. It's not really a skill, is it? It's just something that you've got. However, if you're going to be a carer or a fireman or even a medical person, or, you know, you need empathy by the bucket load, don't you? That is, you couldn't be a carer without empathy. That's more important than you knowing your fronted adverbials from your subordinate clauses, isn't it? You know, so those skills, just because they're not academic skills, they're, you know, how many times do we see in life, you know, like some of these really successful businessmen, these global sort of achievers, quite often weren't academic at school, but they had other skills. You know, a friend of mine, he's a naturalist. I have to be careful when I say that, because I get naturists and naturalists confused, which is a whole nother topic for conversation. He's a naturalist, and he's quite severely dyslexic. So he really, and he's not unintelligent. He's an intelligent man, but he's not an academic. However, he's one of the most interesting, most knowledgeable people I know. One, because he has passion. And he said, I think his mum was a bit annoyed with him because as a child, I think he said bird before he said mum, and she was a bit peeved about that. After all I've done for you, and you've said bird before you said mum. So that's a really good example of that was in him. That was, he was always going to be a lover of nature. If you go to, I've done quite a lot of work with him. We've done workshops at this coastal nature reserve. He's always got a moth in his pocket in a jar, or something in the fridge that he's looking at, or, you know, he's nature through and through. But he said, you know, he's been in the same job for 20 years, but he does something that he loves. Again, he's following his passion. He said, so I don't feel like I've got a job. I'm just doing something. And same as like the little guy fishing who said, if you still come back and fish, even if he didn't have that job, he would still do what he does in that job, which most of the time I think it's not really a job at all, because he goes around counting birds and looking at the sky, which feels like a bit of a police, doesn't it? But, you know, that's in him, and that he's so knowledgeable. He can tell you, oh, that's whatever bird that is, he's doing that because he's nesting, or it's this time of year, it's that time of year. And there's no academics there, but he is so fulfilled, and his life is so enriched because of nature, because of what it's given him. And I just think, you know, I tell this story a lot, but I worked in quite a tough housing estate. There was a lot of poverty. There was a lot of troubles with, you know, addiction and unemployment. And the kids, you know, they had a pretty tough time of it at times. And this was not a pretty estate, you know, it wasn't, you know, because we're saying, oh, take them out of the woods. That's not always possible, is it? It was a very built up area, not overly beautiful, certainly not rural, but there were a little kind of number of allotments, sort of like a rose in amongst a load of thorns, basically. I sort of always saw it as. And I managed to beg, borrow and steal one of these allotments. And one of the little girls I taught, I got her granddad used to, you know, put down worming pellets for the fox, and he'd water our and all of that. And I had a really difficult class this year. There was a lot of issues within this class, just through no fault of their own. And I wouldn't be allowed to do this now, but at least 3 afternoons a week, sometimes 4, I would take them to the allotment, more or less every afternoon. And I would say to them, right, if you do some reading and writing in the morning, we'll go to the allotment. They lived for that allotment. And some of the naughtiest, in inverted commas, boys who would push my buttons to the point at which I'd be saying, if you carry on, you're not coming to the allotment. No, I'm sorry, miss, I'm sorry. But they lived for that, because what they got from that, they got the and a lot of the times they're sitting in class and you're telling them, right, you've got to write this. They struggle with it. They don't like it. They're a bit kind of angry at the world anyway. So all that does is make them more angry. So you take them to a place which allows them to be active, which is kind of, a lot of them are probably quite kinesthetic learners. It diffuses that anger. They stop feeling rubbish about themselves. Everybody can plant a bean, whether you can, you know, you can plant it at one level or another. We grew enough vegetables. We made vegetable soup for parents' evening and they were so proud of this. There was a few cauliflowers and a couple of carrots, but you know, and I think I boosted it quite substantially with some stuff from Tesco, but they didn't know that. But they didn't know, but the pride that they got from that, you know, and we didn't do a lot of writing. We did what we had to do, but the learning that came from that, they learned where their food comes from. They learned that their food doesn't come from the kebab shop. They learned that, you know, it has to grow, that you have to tend it, you have to look after it. They learned about the seasons. They learned that when we planted all of our seeds before the Easter holidays, we got a freak dump in the snow and it killed all of our plants and we were really miffed, you know. But we learned all of that. And what they got was empathy, and they got tolerance, they got patience, they got the ability to care for something other than themselves. And I think it just, if I'd have tried to keep those children contained, and that's what education would ask me to do now, can't go down the allotment every afternoon because it's what you're not doing any learning, you're wasting time, you're not getting that done. But what I got done was I got a group of children who finally would listen to me when I asked them and not swear at me, who finally were motivated and who finally were learning something, whereas trying to contain them doing stuff they hated and they learned nothing. So I just don't understand why we think this one size fits all is the right way. I just, you know.
No, it's a system. It's a system, and it is a system that is unacceptable. And as I say, you know, we're not helping young people, but yeah, nature will be the remedy. It has taught me a lot, and it can teach every person, anybody, a lot themselves. As I say, and in fact, you mentioned lessons like resilience, determination, the will, your drive, and your weaknesses as well, because nature will expose you to that, and it helps you then to go back and just improve on those. And nature does it practically. I say to people, you read these things in theories and you know about them, but nature, the way nature helps you is it exposes you in a practical way to sort of reveal to you that for you to achieve, for you to learn something, it will have to be an effort. So you do it practically, and that's what I like about it. And I would rather be in nature and learn than sit in a classroom and try and learn nothing, really, because it is so diverse that there's so much that you can learn. Because if you look at it in a much more of a very senior and thought-provoking mindset, we are what we are because of nature, and without nature we would not be. That is how I put it.
No, I agree. Well, that's been a wonderful discussion. And you know, the thing that makes me laugh is that when you take the children out or you go into nature, they go, "Oh, miss, it's great, we're not doing any learning, we're not doing any work." And I think if only you knew you're doing 10 times more work than you could ever do in class. But if you want to think that, then that's fine.
It's funny that, because if you would take them out and they say that, and you keep quietly and you give them the 1 hour or 2 hours in nature, and then you come back down and then just in an open discussion and say, okay, we went out yesterday to nature. Let us see what did you learn, and then they will realize that actually I was learning, in as much as I wasn't being given a subject, someone lecturing. Nature was just the lecturer, unknowingly, because they will come up with hundreds of things that they would say they've learned. It's just amazing, because we never really ask them to sort of reveal what they've learned. So if they like, we're excited, at least we're not going to learn. It's like, yes, you're not going to, but you will, because I won't be teaching you, but nature will. The greatest teachers will be, and it's amazing.
And I think as educators, we sometimes think creativity is more work, but if you do it well, it's actually a lot less. It's less, once you get a handle on it, you realise, one, you can do several subjects in several sort of disciplines in one go, and it just sort of flows. I think, you know.
Because you allow the learners, you allow the students to self-educate. That is what I think creative education is about, because you let them educate themselves about what that creativity. So you just introduce, and then therefore the rest is theirs to do. So for me, that will be the advantage.
No, it's wonderful. I think if in doubt, take them out. There we go.
There we go. That's it.
I was always the one going, do you want to go outside? They'd be like, yeah. I thought, we'll have to sneak out.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, no, brilliant.
That's been a wonderful discussion, Sipho. So if we have our own school, we won't spend time outdoors, will we?
No. It's been incredible. It's amazing. And as I say, you know, I came to nature. I wouldn't say by chance. When I look at my root cause, I had to travel the way that happened, but I wasn't aware about it. And it has given me so much. It has taught me a lot, and I don't even stop learning. You learn every day when you go to nature. It's just being observant and being there, pay attention. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And those lessons, as we say, they are transferable. You can apply them to the way you do things, the way you live your life. So they are profound. They're profound. And it's amazing that people will think that you learn by being given a lecturer and using a textbook. No, we just go and explore in nature, and then you come a lot of things and stuff that you would have acquired and then learned. So it's a university that is free for everyone.
I know, it's free as well, isn't it? We're always looking for things to do that are free, and we forget, you know. It's crazy, isn't it?
It's free.
That's been wonderful. Well, thank you once again for joining us. Sipho will be joining us again in future podcasts, and we'll be talking about lots of interesting educational stuff, including inclusion, my big thing, and we'll talk more about creativity in education. You can find Sipho Sisu on Facebook, you can find him on Twitter, you can find him on Instagram, and his website. Remind us again your website, Sipho.
Yes, indeed. You can find me on my website, which is www.sibusisovillane.co.za.
Wonderful. And he's also written a book called To the Top from Nowhere, which is all about his exploits getting to the top of Everest. And you can find that on Amazon. So I'm sure that will be an amazing read. That's on my list of things to read, because I'm really looking forward to that. And if you like what we've got to say, you can find me on Facebook, Write Smart Education. You can also find me at Karen Stanley Author. If you are interested in creative resources, and many of my resources on my website are to do with nature. I'm always in the woods with a video camera, or down by the beach, or I try to bring the outside inside. And as we've talked about today, I find it's just a huge well, it's just a free bank of inspirational and creative ideas that are just there for the taking. So if you have an interest in environmental education, or if you want some creative resources, then you can visit www.writesmarteducation.co.uk, and that's Write, W-R-I-T-E. So thanks again for joining us. It's been wonderful to share our discussion with you, and we'll see you again soon. Take care and have fun out exploring.
Wonderful.
There we go. Let's